Wyoming Territory, 1882. The wind blew hard across the high plains as Rachel Boone buried the last of her mother beneath a lone cottonwood tree, her hands raw and red from the shovel. The earth was hard this time of year, frost still clinging to it like a grudge. Her two children stood behind her, silent, their coats too thin. She did not have time to cry. She had to get them off that land before the bank man came back. The sun was just dipping when she packed what little they owned into the wagon: 2 quilts, a cracked mirror, a tin of flour, and a letter from her brother who had died in Kansas 6 years back. She tied the reins with trembling hands. Matthew, her son, just turned 7, climbed up beside her. Little me, 5, was already asleep under the quilt, her thumb in her mouth. Rachel's husband had left 3 winters ago and never came back. No note, no goodbye, just gone. The neighbor, Mrs. Talbot, said she was better off. But Rachel had lain awake night after night wondering what she had done wrong. If she had been prettier, softer, smarter, maybe he would have stayed, but now it did not matter. She had to find work or shelter before snow swallowed the plains whole. They rode for 2 days, heading west. On the 3rd morning, the wheel on the wagon gave out 5 miles east of a town called Red Rock. The axle cracked loud, and the whole thing leaned. Rachel climbed down and looked at it for a long time, her breath showing in the cold air. She had no money for a blacksmith, not even a cent. Her stomach knotted. She rested her head against the wood, her voice barely a whisper. "I am not enough." "I would not say that," came a man's voice behind her. She turned fast, her heart jumping. A man stood beside a chestnut horse, tall in the saddle, his coat dusted with road. He looked young, maybe 30, with dark hair under a worn hat and a rifle tied to his saddle. His eyes were sharp but not unkind. "My name's Abel Donovan," he said, tipping his hat. "You look like you need help." Rachel straightened, brushing dirt off her skirt. "I do not have money." "I did not ask for any," she blinked. "Then why stop?" He dismounted, tying his horse to a nearby fence post. "Because I do not leave women and children stranded 5 miles from town in the middle of November." Matthew peeked from the wagon, eyes wary. Abel gave him a nod. "I am Rachel," she said finally. "Rachel Boone, that is Matthew, and the little one's me." Abel crouched to check the broken wheel. "You will not make it far like this. Town's not far. I got a place just outside it. You can stay the night, get warm." "I will fix the wheel in the morning." She hesitated. "We do not know you. That is fair. You do not owe me trust, but I am offering help, not harm." Rachel looked at Matthew, then to me, who had started to stir. She felt the cold sinking into her bones and nodded. "All right." Abel helped her lift me, who clung to Rachel's neck. He walked beside the wagon the whole way, his horse trailing behind. His homestead sat low in a valley, a small barn and a cabin with smoke curling out the chimney. Inside it was warm, a fire dancing in the hearth. The smell of stew made Rachel's throat tighten. Abel handed her a bowl without a word. That night, Rachel sat by the fire watching her children sleep on a pallet. Abel sat across from her, sharpening a knife. The silence was not heavy, just quiet. "You alone out here?" she asked. He nodded. "Had a brother, he died last spring." "I am sorry, me too." She looked down at her hands. "I was married, he left, 3 years now." He did not offer pity, just nodded. "I keep wondering what I did wrong," she said, voice low. "Why I was not enough." Abel looked at her a long time. "You got 2 children who look at you like the sun rises in your hands. You hauled them across the plains, buried your dead, and you are still standing. That is more than most." Her throat tightened. "You do not know me. I know enough." In the morning, Abel fixed the wheel. Rachel helped, holding the spokes steady while he hammered. When it was done, she stood back, brushing her hands on her skirt. "I should go," she said. "You can," he said. "But you could stay a bit. I could use help with chores, and the kids, they could stay warm here." Rachel hesitated. "I do not want your charity. It ain't charity, it is need. You need a place. I need someone who knows how to keep things going, and besides." His eyes met hers. "I like having you here." Rachel looked away, but there was heat in her chest that had not been there in years. "All right," she said. For a little while, me took to Abel fast, crawling into his lap with a book. Matthew watched him like a hawk for days, but Abel never pushed, just taught him how to whittle, how to stack firewood. Rachel watched it unfold, slowly trust like snow melting. One evening, after supper, Abel handed her a cup of coffee and nudged her outside. The stars were bright overhead, the prairie wide and quiet. "You are quiet," she said. He looked out over the land. Never had much to say that needed saying. "But I have been thinking about you." She turned toward him. "You ever wonder," he said, "what it would be like to stop running, to let someone stay?" She nodded. "I would not know how." He looked at her for a long time. "You said you are not enough." "But Rachel, you are more than I ever dreamed," her breath caught. "I ain't saying it all at once," he continued, "but I want you here, not just for the work, not just for the children, for you." Rachel looked down, tears catching in her lashes, then she reached for his hand. "I want to stay," she whispered, "but only if it is real." "It is," he said. "It is real as anything I have ever known." And for the first time in years, Rachel believed it. The first snowfall came 2 weeks later, soft and slow, settling over the valley like a hush. Rachel stood at the cabin's doorway, apron dusted with flour, watching the flakes sift down onto the fence rails and bare trees. Abel was in the barn, his boots crunching over the hay-strewn floor as he checked the stalls. Matthew trailed after him, arms folded tight against the cold, listening close. Inside, Mee sat at the small table, humming tunelessly as she pressed buttons through fabric squares. Rachel had shown her how to stitch circles that morning, her own fingers guiding the needle while Mee leaned against her side. The girl's small hum still lingered in Rachel's ears as she turned back to the dough she was kneading. It had been quiet since they'd come. Not easy, but steady. Rachel woke before sunup, swept ash from the hearth, started bread, mended what needed mending. Abel never asked her to stay longer, never pressed, but he made room for her in small ways, an extra hook by the door for her shawl, a shelf cleared in the cupboard for her tin of tea. She hadn't made a decision yet, not aloud, but her hands moved through the rhythm of the place as though they already belonged. That evening, Abel brought in a bundle of dried corn husks and set them by the stove. "Found these in the old shed," he said, brushing snow from his sleeves. "Figured me might like to make dolls." Rachel looked up from where she was straightening the bedding. "You made corn husk dolls as a boy," he shook his head, drawing off his gloves. "My ma did. She used to make a whole row of them on the windowsill come winter. Said they kept the house from feeling empty." Mee looked up, curious. "You had a mama?" Abel crouched beside her. "I did. She was quiet like your mama, but she had strong hands, like spring roots." Mee held up the half-finished doll in her lap. "Will you help me with the arms?" He smiled faintly, reached for the husks. "Let's see what we can do." Rachel watched him thread the twine, his fingers steady. She couldn't remember the last time someone had done something just for the sake of her children, not out of duty, just kindness. Later, once the children were asleep beneath their quilt, Rachel stepped out into the still night with a lantern and found Abel splitting kindling by moonlight. His coat hung open, breath fogging the air. "You should come in," she said. "Your hands'll go stiff." He drove the axe down once more and straightened. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd get ahead on the pile." She held the lantern higher. "You always work when you can't sleep. Helps me think." She stepped closer, the snow creaking beneath her boots. "What are you thinking about?" He looked down at the blade, then wiped his hands on his trousers. "About how fast things can change without warning, how a person can be living one way for years and then something shifts." Rachel's voice was soft. "You mean us?" He didn't answer right away. The wind stirred the trees beyond the fence line, their bare limbs black against the snow. "I was used to being alone," he said finally. "Didn't mind it, thought that was just how things were going to be. Then you came down that road, and everything's been different since." She set the lantern on the stump beside him. "That wagon wheel breaking. That was the worst and best thing that's happened to me in a long while." He breathed out through his nose, slow. "I didn't expect to want this." She reached for one of the logs, brushed off the snow, and sat. "Neither did I." Abel sat across from her, hands clasped loosely between his knees. "I keep thinking about what comes next, not just through the snow, but after. What it might mean to build something with another person again." Rachel looked at the dim glow of the cabin window where the children slept. "I haven't had anything steady in a long time. I forgot how to want it." "You think you could remember?" She met his eyes. "I'm trying," he nodded, slow. "That's enough for me." They sat there until the cold started to bite through the wool. Rachel stood first, brushed off her skirt, and picked up the lantern. I'll keep the fire going, she said. In case you come in late. I'll be in soon. She looked at him once more, his face quiet in the moonlight, and felt something stir low in her chest, not fear, not uncertainty, but a steady warmth. Back inside, she added another log to the fire and tucked the children in tighter. She moved through the room with care, as if her presence mattered here. As if she was no longer passing through, outside the snow kept falling, soft as breath. The days shortened and the snow deepened. Smoke from the cabin chimney rose steady each morning, and the hush of winter settled over the land like a wool blanket. Inside, the rhythm of life unfolded with quiet certainty. Rachel mending by the hearth, Abel hauling in wood or scraping ice from the trough, me humming to herself as she traced letters in the ash on the floorboards, and Matthew sitting near the fire, carving something small and careful with Abel's old penknife. One afternoon, after a heavy sky gave way to pale sunlight, Abel hitched his horse and rode into Red Rock for supplies. Rachel stood in the doorway with Matthew, watching until the sound of hoofbeats faded behind the ridge. She hadn't realized how used she'd become to his presence, until the silence left in his wake pressed close around her. Rachel spent the time scrubbing the floors while me napped and Matthew dozed near the fire. She paused once, wiping her brow with the back of her hand, and stared at the cabin walls. There were signs of her everywhere now. Her stitching hung over the window, the tin of dried apple slices she'd set aside for Christmas tucked on a shelf. The thin red ribbon me had tied around the broom handle. As dusk crept in, Abel returned with a sack slung over one shoulder and snow crusted on his coat hem. Rachel opened the door before he could knock. "I found something for you," he said, pulling a folded bolt of blue calico from the sack. "Saw it in the mercantile. Thought it looked like your kind of color." Rachel took it slowly. The cloth was soft and deep as cornflowers. She couldn't speak for a moment. "I figured you might want a Sunday dress," he added, his voice low. "I haven't had one since before me was born. You'll have one now." She ran her fingers over the fabric, then held it close to her chest. "Thank you." Abel rubbed the back of his neck, eyes on the floor. "I saw the schoolhouse has a notice tacked up. The teacher left for Cheyenne. They're looking for someone to take over come spring." Rachel lifted her head. "I taught for a bit before I married. I thought maybe you'd want to again." She looked down at the fabric. "I never thought I'd have the chance." "You got the steadiness for it," he said, "and the voice. When you read to the children, the room listens." Rachel folded the cloth with care. "I'd have to go speak with the preacher." "I'll take you whenever you're ready." She nodded, her heart beating a little faster. "I'd like that." That night, after the children were asleep and the fire burned low, Abel stepped outside to tend the animals. Rachel followed, drawing her shawl tighter around her shoulders. He reached for the lantern hanging by the barn door. "You didn't have to come, I know." The light glowed against the snow-covered ground as they walked toward the barn. Inside, the horses shifted and snorted softly. Abel checked the latches, then turned to her. "You still think about leaving?" Rachel leaned against the stall gate. "Not the way I did before." He waited, his breath misting the air. "I used to believe all I had to offer was grit," she said, holding things together with threadbare hope. "I didn't think anyone could look at me and see more than survival. I see a woman who holds everything upright without speaking loud about it," Abel said. "That takes more than grit." She stepped closer. "Sometimes I wonder if you've been waiting for someone like me." "I wasn't waiting," he said. "But now that you're here, I can't imagine the days without you in them." She reached for his hand. "I want to stay, not just through winter, for good." He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "Then build it with me, a life, quiet and real," her voice caught. "I never thought I'd get to choose that. You do now." They stood like that a long while, the horses breathing slow around them, the snow falling again outside, and for the first time in years, Rachel didn't feel like she'd been left behind. She felt chosen, and more than that, she felt whole. By late January, the snow lay deep around the cabin, the drifts high enough to bury the fence in places. The wind cut sharp through the valley, but inside, the warmth held steady. Rachel sat at the table, sleeves rolled to her elbows as she guided Matthew's hand through the loops of cursive letters. Abel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching them with a quiet ease that hadn't been there when winter began. Rachel didn't say it aloud, but she'd started sewing the blue calico dress. The pieces lay folded beneath her mending basket, half-stitched, waiting for a day when she didn't feel like a visitor in her own life. Lately, that feeling had been coming less and less. That afternoon, a knock came hard at the door, not hurried, but firm. Abel opened it to a man wrapped in a buffalo coat, his beard crusted with snow. He was older, maybe in his 50s, and his eyes moved quickly over the room before settling on Rachel. "Name's Cyrus Bell," he said, removing his hat. "I just rode in from the north end of the valley. Heard word you might be the one keeping Boone's children." Rachel stood, one hand on the back of Matthew's chair. I'm their mother," Cyrus nodded. "I knew your husband, rode with him out of Laramie some years back. He owed me silver and cards, but I reckon that's settled now." She kept her face still. "He's gone, so I heard." Abel stepped forward. "You come all this way to collect from a widow?" Cyrus gave a faint shake of his head. "No, I'm not here for coin. I came to return something." From his coat he drew a small wooden box, the kind that fit in a saddlebag. He held it out to Rachel. "He left it in my keeping before he rode west. Said if he didn't make it back, it was meant for her." Rachel took the box with both hands, the weight of it unfamiliar. She didn't open it, not yet. Cyrus gave a nod and stepped back toward the door. "Didn't mean to stir anything." "You didn't," she said. "Thank you." After the door shut behind him, Rachel set the box on the table. Abel didn't speak, just waited. Inside were a few folded papers, stained from years of travel, and a small silver brooch shaped like a swallow. Rachel recognized it. It had been her mother's, once pinned to the scarf she wore on Sundays. Her husband had taken it when he left. She sat down slowly, fingers running over the edge of the box. He never wrote, not once. Abel pulled a chair beside her. "You don't have to read them." "I want to," she said, though her voice was tight. She read the first letter in silence, then the second. By the third, her hands had begun to tremble. "He wasn't coming back," she said at last. "He was sick, consumption, he knew it, left to spare us watching him die." Abel didn't reach for her. He just stayed close, his presence solid as the stove's heat. Rachel folded the letters and set them back in the box. "I thought he left because I wasn't enough, because I was too plain, too quiet, but that wasn't it." "No," Abel said. "It wasn't." She looked at him, the last of that old ache loosening from her chest. "I carried that weight for years. You don't have to anymore." Later, when the children were tucked into bed and the fire had settled into embers, Rachel stepped outside with Abel. The stars were sharp overhead, and the sky stretched wide as an empty canvas. "I've been thinking," she said, her breath white in the cold. "That schoolhouse job, I want it." "I'll ride in with you come thaw," Abel said. "We'll speak to the preacher," she nodded. "And the dress, I'd like to finish it." He reached for her hand, gloved and steady. "Then I'd like to see you wear it, first Sunday after the thaw." She looked at him, her voice quiet. "Would you walk beside me?" Abel's grip tightened just enough to be felt. "Every Sunday." Every day after. She didn't speak, just leaned into him beneath the stars, the weight of the box left behind on the table, its contents no longer heavy, and for the first time she wasn't surviving. She was beginning. By early March, the thaw had begun. Not with warmth, but with softening edges, the snow at the edge of the cabin roof dripping slow, the sound of meltwater trickling beneath the crusted soil. The wind still carried a bite, but the light had changed. It lingered longer in the evenings, gold spilling across the valley like the first promise of something better. Rachel stood at the wash basin with her sleeves damp and rolled high. The last of the winter linens soaked in the tub nearby, steam curling above them. Her hands worked without thought, but her mind kept drifting to the folded dress lying on the table, nearly finished. There were only a few seams left to close. She'd waited until she felt sure this was her place, not merely passing through, but rooted. Behind her, Me's small voice broke the quiet. "Will we still live here when the flowers come?" Rachel turned. "Do you want to?" Me nodded, then pressed her cheek against the cabin wall. "It doesn't feel like going anymore. It feels like staying." Rachel didn't reply, but her chest ached with a quiet joy so deep it surprised her. That same day, Abel hitched the wagon and loaded it with Rachel's teaching certificate and the sealed letter of recommendation he'd written in his careful hand. They rode into Red Rock together, Matthew and me bundled between them on the bench, the thawed road muddy beneath the wheels. The town had changed since she'd seen it last, stores newly painted, the blacksmith's boy taller, the church bell polished to a shine. Reverend Alton received them in his study at the back of the church. He was a thin man with a soft voice and an honest face. When he asked Rachel why she wanted the post, she answered plainly. "I want to teach because children deserve steadiness," she said. "And because I've learned that I still have more to give." The Reverend looked from the letter to Rachel, then at the two children waiting on the front steps, their boots muddy and hands clasped. "You'll have the schoolhouse," he said. "1st of April, if you're ready." Rachel nodded, her voice catching in her throat. "I am." That night, back at the cabin, Rachel sat by the fire hemming the dress. Abel worked beside her, crafting a small wooden shelf for her books. The silence between them was easy, familiar. After a while, Rachel set her needle down and turned toward him. "I've been thinking about the land behind the barn. There's space for a garden come spring. Potatoes, onions, maybe beans if we're lucky." Abel looked up, his hands still. "I'd like that." "I was also thinking," she said slowly, "that you and I never spoke on paper, not the way folks do when they mean to stay." He set the wood aside. "You saying you want to marry me, Rachel Boone?" She met his gaze, steady. "I'm saying I already have, in every way that matters. But I'd like the rest too." He reached for her hand, calloused and warm. "Then we'll speak the vows under that cottonwood tree, come spring bloom, with the children beside us and the land waking around us." Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "I never thought I'd grow something new out of all that loss." Abel's thumb brushed the side of her hand. "You didn't grow in spite of it, you grew because of it." On the first Sunday of April, Rachel stepped out of the cabin wearing the blue calico dress. Abel waited by the wagon, his coat brushed clean and his hair trimmed. Matthew had combed his with water until it lay flat, and me wore a ribbon Rachel had saved from a parcel long ago. They rode into town together, not as stragglers or wanderers, but as a family. The church was half full when they arrived. Neighbors Rachel hadn't yet met nodded kindly. The children found a pew near the front. When the service ended, Reverend Alton called them forward. No grand ceremony, just words spoken plain and honest beneath the wooden cross. "I will," Rachel said, her voice clear. "I will," Abel answered, his hand in hers. Matthew held the ring Abel had carved from a coin, and me twisted the hem of her new dress, eyes shining. When it was done, they stepped out into the sunlight, the wind softer than it had been in months. The cottonwoods beyond the church had begun to bud, and the ground smelled of thawed earth. Abel helped her into the wagon, his hand settling at her back as if it had always known its place there. She leaned into him, her voice low. "You think we'll make it?" He looked out over the hills, the shape of their home just visible beyond the rise. "We already have." In the weeks that followed, Rachel began each morning at the schoolhouse, her voice strong as she taught letters and sums, her children among the rows of students. Abel tended the land and built a fence around the garden plot. In the evenings, they read by lamplight or watched the dusk settle against the hills, their fingers loosely entwined. One warm afternoon, Abel brought home a pair of saplings. He planted them near the cabin, one on each side of the path leading to the door. Rachel stood beside him, dirt under her fingernails, and pressed her palm to the trunk of one. "They'll take root," he said. She nodded. "So have we," and they had. From the cracked earth of grief and the lean years of wandering, something strong had grown quiet, lasting, and full of grace. They lived the rest of their days in the valley, side by side. Summers in the garden, winters by the fire. The children grew tall under their care, and no one ever asked again if Rachel Boone had enough to offer, because she did, and she was loved.